Welcome to another deep dive with me, Nicole. After we comb through pricing adjustment tactics for inflation, plant-based packaging trends, and planograms that just might help you minimise the effects of cost of living crisis, today we go back to the basics, pack claims. If you haven't stumbled upon our previous episodes yet, I recommend you shuffle through the whole playlist, which is available on ICEY's YouTube and Spotify. Today, I'll be addressing major industry misconceptions around claims and talk about how to pick the right ones. Joining me for this important talk is Sandra Stojanovic, ICEY's very own communications expert running our marketing team. And her previous experience includes working for major FMCG and cosmetics brands as part of the McCann Creative Agency. Welcome, Sandra.
Hey, happy to be here. Well, as a former copywriter, I have to say I have a soft spot for claims. They're at the very core of how brands understand their role in the market within categories. So I was like both a consumer and somebody who had to think of the ideas for claims. This is a super, super exciting topic for me. And picking the right one really requires a serious skill and some data.
I fully agree, Sandra, especially about the data part. Sandra and I are also joined by one of ICEY's top shopper insight experts and rising stars amongst our clients, Tara Tesanovic.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Nicole. Now I sort of feel the pressure to live up to this flattering introduction. But jokes aside, with estimated 80 to 95% of shoppers making their purchase decisions subconsciously in stores and within seconds, and over 2/3 of them doing so heavily influenced by product claims, it really sounds like picking the right claims is a discussion we need to have more often.
That is so true, Tara. Certain colours, using verbs over nouns, and demographic-specific vocabulary can all make on-pack claims more convincing for consumers. And brands usually have a lot to say about what makes their amazing products so great. So really selecting a few pointed claims can feel like picking your favourite children sometimes. However, there is a fair share of myths around picking and testing claims, so let's start our discussion there. In recent years, the frequency of testing sustainable products and promotional materials really picked up, which leads me to myth number one. All natural and eco-friendly labels evoke trust and attract sustainable consumers.
Well, indeed, consumers are increasingly interested in eating healthy foods and buying eco-friendlier options. But, the problem is that the terms used to identify healthy foods are often sort of inconsistent or vague. Citric acid, for example, it can be either natural or artificially produced, which means seeing it listed as an ingredient does not tell a consumer very much. Also, our study from last year actually pinned eco and green as some of the least trusted claims. However, more specific eco claims like made from 100% recyclable materials did way better across KPIs. And now, further on the note of being specific, which is usually achieved by giving percentages, it is best to focus on features where you can claim 100% or, at least something close. You see, consumers are becoming increasingly rigorous when it comes to naturalness and sustainability. They have high expectations. So claiming 100% recyclability will be regarded in a more positive light than claiming that packaging is made with, for instance, 20% less plastic. And then one more point comes to mind with regards to this topic, which is that the average green consumer is becoming increasingly knowledgeable about the nits and bits of sustainability, about the many gray areas. So if you're claiming to be 100% recyclable, but your bottle is sporting a black cap, consumers might be quick to think that you should have made it clear that the 100% applies to the bottle only.
Exactly. I feel like 100% is not always cutting it with the more sophisticated consumers. In some cases, it's even better to say something along the lines of like made out of 97% reused materials. It's such a stronger claim than 100% recyclable materials. Why? Because in a way, it's way more transparent. It's considered. We can even say it admits to certain limitations and realities in production and distribution chain. And it's essentially it allows consumers to build that necessary trust in the category, populated by vagueness and regulatory gray zones, especially given that sustainable products still tend to be on the pricier side. Trust and loyalty are key in making sustainability actually sustainable.
Thanks for that, guys. Now let's address another myth. You'll often hear marketeers say, if a claim is good, it works in any context.
Well, competitors' overview, different shelves, category localizations, different platforms. All of these actually have impact on how claims are perceived. Now, in e-commerce, for example, you would usually, right, analyze a specific retailer website to optimize your pack shot, and thus ensure your hero image is able to stand out among many others. Well, with claims, the approach should be no different, as context heavily conditions the claim. When it comes to on-pack claims specifically, it is also important to have in mind where exactly your claim will be placed. For example, long, more complex claims can work well on the back of the packaging. However, they rarely prove to be effective on the front side, where you would actually need, a punchier claim covering only the key elements. Thus, how we usually approach claim testing is that we first sort of devise general learnings based on a specific study focus. And then what we do next is that we try to pinpoint which elements work best and should stay in the claim regardless of, the exact context or claim length. So in a sense, we work with the client in an iterative mode.
I had a brilliant mentor once who tried to give me feedback or pointers on how to approach writing different claims. He said the front of the pack claim is like a book cover. You know you've done a bad job if consumers go to the detailed FDA-inspired writing on the back way too quickly. That usually means they didn't get, the sufficient amount of details from the key claims you picked, from the ones that are kind of more general. But what's even worse is if they never really reach the back at all. But speaking of the context and placement, and Tara, you've already mentioned the e-commerce. I think this is a particularly challenging area for brands. With more traditional clients, it takes training to adapt to the new environment. What is communicated where, which parts of the product landing page actually allow for certain communication bits. The challenge is to let go of showing your pack shot as if it were a full 3D rendering of the physical product, right? Remember, even the most user-friendly e-tailers show the products on the actual screens, often allowing you to browse the whole categories with 10, 20, 50 different products. So the scale of the pack images is much, much smaller than the actual physical pack. And this, in turn, has to put your brick and mortar claim concept into question.
Right, so no claim is universally good. Context really matters. Now let's address one more misconception. Claims should always be tested in the branded context, meaning that respondents must be aware of the brand and product the claims are tested for. Otherwise, the study makes little sense.
This is not always necessary, and we actually often conduct sort of blind tests to get a less biased idea if the claim works. For example, in situations where the brand is super famous, super loved, this can actually cloud or color the answers. Well-loved, reputable brands, they're especially known to cloud judgments of claims believability in the sense that it is much harder to see whether any of the claims are objectively vague and insufficiently substantiated. So if you, for instance, want to test claims regarding some important innovation or feature, you could actually consider going unbranded to have a clear picture of how your communication is truly perceived. Now, it's also important to know that even if you decide to go unbranded, right, we can still tackle how the claim generally aligns with your brand by revealing the brand at the end of the survey and asking about claims brand fit.
Right. Whilst you're talking about this, Tara, what came to my mind is if Ordinary were to put out any claim, I would totally believe it.
Right, now that we've touched on the testing framework, let's take a step back. How do client end teams usually approach developing an effective claim? Where do they even start?
Well, it usually starts with the consumer. Brands map all the influences on the choice of product and try to create a hierarchy among them to better understand what triggers their purchase decision. The ultimate goal is to know within the category and for that specific product what matters the most and why. Sometimes they look at consumers' current behavior or what needs changing. For instance, in some categories, consumers make a conscious decision to go a healthier route. Other times, there is a tension in consumers' lives, and the product is positioned to tackle that. Apart from the areas of influence, they also start with understanding the barriers. In the luxury segment, for example, knowing when to play the democratization card versus aspirational, like old money exclusivity, is crucial for the claim strategy. Likewise, in beer category, Gen Zers seem way more risk averse and committed to decrease alcohol consumption. So while domestic light beers suffer each year, craft beers and alcohol-free options are on the rise. So beer category claims are slowly adjusting to denormalize drinking as a social lubricant and are actually claiming new domains of exploration, special rituals, individual choice, which is, of course, super novel in terms of beer category. So after influences and barriers are mapped, there's usually an iterative process of making a pool of claims and testing them to find the combination that will have the greatest impact on the purchase and loyalty.
And what are some bad practices when it comes to claims?
Well, I can think of two straight away. First being just not being able to prioritize and getting lost and trying to communicate too much. I once saw a toilet paper pack which had 2 extra rolls, softer, made out of recycled materials, good for your baby, like all the claims a category, can claim. We know you're proud of your products and you have loads to say, as you should be. But knowing where to draw a line and really put your best claim forward is key. After all, claims are not meant to communicate everything about a product. Just give consumers a perspective on what makes that product different or worth taking note of. If claims are too complicated or too long, sharpies don't have the time or energy to work them out. Like, it takes too much processing power to do so. And I would say the second bad practice has to be going overboard and overpromising. Consumers can smell that.
Oh, I believe in advertising, they refer to this as puffery. I love that term. It's so fitting. There is, however, a line when stretching the truth, which, if crossed, can do more harm than good for the brand. Actually, 3 in 4 consumers say that most of the claims that brand make in advertisements seem exaggerated, according to a study by Lab 42. Consumers show skepticism towards weight loss, alcohol, financial, and automotive categories the most. And, once trust is lost, it takes way more effort to build it up again.
This is, of course, somewhat of a cultural thing. The US might be more competitive with claims and pushing the producers to go big or go home, unlike, for instance, in Asia. So hitting the right mark is not only about knowing your claim hierarchy, it is also about being aware of market specificity.
Stretching the truth is a risky business, and there's a greater message embedded in there, I think. Never ever underestimate the consumer. And speaking of this, Tara, how does your team help brands navigate the process and bring the surprise after launch to a minimum?
Well, I would always suggest going beyond purely explicit and looking for ways to bypass biases. A mixed method approach, it is really the best way to mitigate risks. Every single method has a limit, and by having the right combination, one can uncover the full picture with way more productivity. For instance, at IC, validation studies prove that combining eye tracking with surveys gives 2 to 3 times more productivity than surveys alone. For claims specifically, we actually have, typical KPIs that we measure alongside brand fit, which I already mentioned. Usually, the most important KPI is relevance or purchase intent, which we measure by means of MaxDiff. Now, MaxDiff, it's a very handy methodology that sort of forces respondents to rank the claims from best to worst, and thus it offers a high level of discrimination between claims. So with MaxDiff, you really get this clear distinction between claims that work well and those that are weaker. We also supplement MaxDiff with your typical, Likert scale questions that measure claim uniqueness, clarity, and as mentioned, believability and brand fit. And as we all know, claims tests are notoriously hard to read. And for this reason, we also have a very nice way of visualizing the results by plotting the claims on relevance or MaxDiff score and uniqueness simultaneously. By zooming in on these two metrics, we get a pretty good insight into which of your claims can make your product stand out.
That's fascinating, Tara. I guess the challenge there and why you need a good research partner is also knowing which methods to combine.
Exactly. Most behavioral insights agencies nowadays do offer mixed method options, and the differences actually come down to scalability and efficacy.
Now, can you think of claim examples that really worked and why do you think they were successful? Essentially, what are the markers of a good claim?
Well, bringing this conversation back to where we started, the best claims demonstrate a deeper understanding of consumers' needs, right? For each product category, there's a distinct route to consider and choose from. Sometimes you put focus on ingredients, sometimes there's an ethical angle, other times there's taste as a key component. But beyond this, it is important to remember that claims are not merely words. They're part of pack design and incorporate elements such as shapes and colors. Do not forget about how potent and efficient these elements can be in communication. One example that demonstrates both excellent understanding of consumers' triggers and use of design for me was something I saw recently in the fresh section of my supermarket. The non-organic varieties of watermelon actually suffer from lack of taste and sweetness, and they're widely unpopular among consumers. So to promote the smaller and sweeter watermelon, the Deleuze supermarket actually made small red claims. They're actually communicated bits about the origin of the watermelon, but also featured a cute claim saying, "Sweet like the first kiss." Now, putting aside whether all of our first kisses were sweet or perhaps maybe on the awkward side, we all get the message, right? And the red also works well against the green surface of the watermelon. So essentially, the solution for this claim was really great. It attracts attention, it gets the job done. And by the way, the watermelon was great.
Now, let's look beyond claims and into the more general perspective on consumer behaviour. What I found really interesting this month was an article, or an obituary, as they called it, from Business Insider, which talked about how the metaverse is dead and that has been abandoned by the business world. And the main issue with it, amongst the few that were discussed in this article, was that it was never clear what problem the metaverse was solving for consumers. And as I was reading it, it made so much sense to me. And I was thinking about the new generative AI tools that are capturing everyone's interest at the moment. And apparently they're addressing just about any need from marketing to property investment if you listen to all of the influencers out there. Sandra, what are some of the insights that stuck with you particularly important this month?
Right. Well, apart from the whole conversation around the AI and the ChatGPT, one maybe smaller thing that captured my attention was an article published by Helen Gilmore at Beano Brain. She was talking about how millennials are kind of growing into this role of parenting, and it was a bit shocking to me because I am a millennial, and apparently bits of my generation are now raising Generation Alpha. So what she noted was that millennials kind of matured into this parenting role in truly unprecedented times, which are filled with like global pandemic and then war in Ukraine. There's always something happening, and it's always like super apocalyptic. And we're also the first digital first generation. So according to her, millennials kind of have this unique parenting style, which reflects and shapes the Gen Alpha offspring. They're actually nurturing their individuality is celebrated even by their parents. They encourage them to take the stand for their beliefs. They have a much, much closer relationship. So the challenge for brands and marketers is now how to respond to this focus on individuality. How do you cater for mass individualism, and how do you respond to a generation that might see you as part of the problem?
As you mentioned, Sandra, millennials are way more present in their kids' lives, so perhaps cross-family enjoyment occasions are worth exploring. Loads to unpack and consider with that topic, to be fair, so thanks for bringing it up. How about you, Tara?
Oh, my insight of the month, it has to be the trend of video ads getting shorter. In line with people spending more and more time on their smartphones and the reign of TikTok, the average ad length continues to go down. In fact, there's currently much talk about the advantages of ultra short ads that are actually only up to 6 seconds long. But there's a thing with short formats, which is that they do make it harder to establish a connection with the brand, which seems to make them a suboptimal choice for, lesser known brands or upcoming brands. But still, I have a positive outlook in a sense that I think with the right amount of creative work, it can be done. And I think we are to see a lot more interesting ads that build these quick emotion brand connections. So it's something I'm really looking forward to.
That's so interesting you say this, and the extreme of that comes into my mind is the Burger King ad that they ran during the Super Bowl, which was like a third of a second long, but then it had a promotional codes that you can, use in their restaurants. Obviously, everyone was trying to pause at the right time, kind of capturing that code, which was really fun. But yeah, like I said, that's an extreme of what you were just saying.
Truly. And I recall a couple of years ago, I think we helped Twitter, we co-created a new ad format with Twitter at the time, which was literally 6-second ads. So this really feeds into that trend. So looking forward how the, social media landscape will transform.
So claims are at the very core of any product strategy, and we could probably go on about this topic for days. Alas, we stop here for the day. A massive thank you to Sandra for providing the communication angle, and to Tara, who shared her observations working on shopper insights projects at IC. Our next episode will tackle the rising new models of work in market research. A few exciting researchers are working tirelessly to make consumer knowledge accessible across teams and functions. So stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe and get updated on the upcoming talks, as well as check out the list of the previous talks with major CPG experts. Goodbye.